I'm Margaret Quinn. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in a small house with shutters painted a shade of green, Gerald once called lucky. This was my first Christmas without him, and I don't think anyone really prepares you for how loud a quiet room can feel when someone you love is no longer in it. Gerald passed away 7 months ago. Not suddenly, not slowly either. Just a quiet slipping away after 43 years of shared mornings and crossword puzzles. When he was here, he made Christmas feel like a warm quilt pulled tight across your shoulders. He'd carve the roast hum off key carols and always forget which child wanted mashed potatoes and which one swore off carbs. We'd laugh, the kind of laugh that echoed long after the dishes were done. This year, I didn't want the house to feel like a mausoleum of memories. So I made a reservation at the Langmore. It's that fancy French place nestled beside the historic inn. Gerald and I had gone there on our 35th anniversary. The kids always said the escargot was weird, but I remembered how the light hit the chandelier like a snowfall. I picked out the same red velvet dress I wore that night. The one Gerald said made me look like Christmas itself. I asked the kids a month in advance. Liam, Sophie, and Ethan. 3 lives scattered across Chicago, Miami, and Denver. 3 calendars I memorized better than my own. I planned the menu C base for Ethan, who always said turkey was dry. A creme brulee for Sophie. A Merlot for Liam, aged the same year he graduated college. I thought if I wrapped it all up just right, it might feel like family again. I wasn't hoping for a miracle. Just 4 chairs filled. 4 voices around one table. I even bought place cards with little gold trim. It felt silly writing my children's names in cursive like we were hosting the Obamas, but I wanted it to feel special. I wanted them to feel what I was trying so hard to hold on to. That somehow, even without Gerald, we were still us. The first call came at 10:15 in the morning. Sophie's voice was rushed background noise thick with crying. She said her daughter Lila had broken out in hives after eating a Christmas cookie at a friend's house. They were on their way to urgent care. She apologized 3 times before hanging up. I told her it was all right that I understood, but something in her tone didn't sound like Sophie. 2 hours later, just after lunch, Ethan called from Denver. He was still at the hospital. A car accident had flooded the ER with patients, and the attending physician had asked him to stay. He promised he'd make it up to me. I told him not to worry, that saving lives was important. But I remember wondering how a surgeon who usually called ahead to reschedule haircuts had somehow forgotten to let me know before the day itself. At 3:20 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Liam. Flight canceled? Snowstorm over O'Hare. He sent a photo from the airport terminal, blurry and distant. It could have been taken from last year. He said he tried to rebook, but nothing would get him in before midnight. He wished me a warm and cozy evening. By 4:30 p.m., I was still sitting at home, fully dressed, earrings on, and shoes I hadn't worn in years starting to pinch. The dining room table sat empty behind me, place cards still in their box. For a moment, I debated calling the restaurant to cancel. But then I stood, took my coat from the peg by the door, and stepped into the fading daylight. The Langmore was lit like a jewel box. Wreaths trimmed the windows. A soft piano played near the bar. When I gave my name at the front, the hostess glanced behind me before realizing I was alone. She smiled, polite and practiced, and led me to the table I'd reserved for 4. They had set it beautifully. Gold-rimmed glasses, folded napkins like orchids. My name sat in front of me in looping gold letters. The server came over with a warm grin and asked if I wanted to wait a few minutes for the others. I told him no. I'd just go ahead and order. Around me, couples clinked glasses. Children laughed between bites of sugar-dusted pastries. A man pulled a small box from his coat and handed it across the table. His partner gasped, then reached over to kiss him. I turned back to the menu. I didn't really read it. When the wine came, I asked for the Merlot, the one Gerald used to order. It tasted thinner than I remembered. The sea bass arrived shortly after, skin crisp plated like something from a magazine. I cut one bite, then another, and finally gave up. My appetite had stayed at home. Every few minutes, I glanced at the door, even though I knew better. It became habit. A reflex, like holding out hope that hadn't been invited in the first place. At some point, the family across from me sang "Happy Birthday" for their grandmother. She blew out a single candle on a raspberry tart. They all clapped. I caught my reflection in the window and almost didn't recognize myself. The red velvet dress still fit, but my eyes looked tired. Not just from the night, from trying for too long to hold a family together by sheer force of will. At 6:45 p.m., the server brought the dessert menu. I asked for a second glass of wine instead. Outside, the snow had begun to fall in soft sheets, blanketing the sidewalk and muting the noise. Inside, the restaurant stayed warm and full, but I had never felt more distant from it all. There's a kind of sadness that doesn't need to shout. It just sits with you, polite and quiet, through the soup and the wine and the space where laughter should be. I was halfway through my second glass of wine when the door opened fast enough to draw the hostess's attention. A boy stumbled in, cheeks flushed, breathing hard. His winter coat hung open and snow clung to his shoulders. It took me a second, maybe two, to recognize him. Benji, Sophie's son, my grandson. He spotted me right away and hurried over, brushing past a couple waiting near the coat rack. He looked like he'd run through a storm. His shoes were soaked. In his hand was a worn manila envelope, creased and damp at the corners. When he reached the table, he didn't sit, just stood there, catching his breath. I asked what he was doing here. He said he didn't have much time. His voice was low, almost afraid of being heard. Then he dropped it like it weighed 100 pounds. "They're not coming," he said. "They were never planning to." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Benji said he overheard them. All three of them. At Ridgeview Bistro. It's just 3 blocks down across from the bookstore Gerald used to love. They were sitting there, eating, drinking, talking about Dad's will. He said Liam kept checking some document on his phone. Ethan made a joke about power of attorney. Sophie kept ordering wine. They weren't sad. They weren't in emergency rooms or airports. They were celebrating. I asked him how he knew all this. He looked around the restaurant, nervous, then leaned in and handed me the envelope. Inside, he said, were papers Gerald had locked in the garage desk drawer. Things I was supposed to have. Things my kids didn't want me to see. He found them 2 days ago when Sophie asked him to get the old tree stand. He'd been holding on to them, trying to figure out what to do. I opened the envelope without speaking. The flap tore. My hands shook. Inside was a thick stack of documents, paper clips rusted slightly from moisture. The top page was a cover letter. Below that, a notarized will. Gerald's signature bold and slanted. I stared at it, not fully understanding. Benji told me he left Ridgeview without saying anything. He didn't want to be part of it. He said they didn't even notice him leave. He just got up, walked out, and came straight to me. He hadn't told anyone. Not yet. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. I'd spent the whole day trying not to take their absence personally. I told myself life was complicated, weather was unpredictable, emergencies happened. I made excuses for them because that's what mothers do. But now, in the middle of a restaurant filled with candlelight and laughter, I felt something different take root. It wasn't anger. Not quite. It was the slow crumbling of something you thought was solid. The moment when the frame tilts and you see that the picture never hung straight. Benji sat down across from me. His face looked older than 16. I looked at him, really looked, and realized I wasn't sure how well I knew him at all. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the wine in my glass went untouched. I stared at the documents on the table, but all I could see was the empty space beside me. And how long it had been empty. The papers felt heavier than they looked. The weight of truth, maybe. I slid out the contents of the envelope, slowly flattening each sheet with the back of my hand. The Langmore's background chatter faded into a kind of blur. I could still hear silverware clinking and the hum of conversation, but it all seemed far away now, like I'd slipped underwater. The first thing I noticed was Gerald's handwriting. Just a few notes scribbled in the margin of a cover page. He never liked to leave things vague. I used to tease him about his to-do lists. Even on Saturdays, he'd write down brush teeth as if he feared forgetting the basics. But this wasn't basic. The will was dated 5 months before he passed. It was long, detailed, notarized, and witnessed. His signature was strong. No sign of hesitation. And right there in bold letters, it stated that everything our cabin in Blue Ridge, the mutual funds, the art collection he spent decades building, was to go to me. Solely me. No divisions, no percentages, no compromises. I reread that line more times than I can count. Gerald had always been fair, sometimes to a fault. He never liked playing favorites with the kids. But here, there was no question. He didn't leave them anything. Not even a symbolic heirloom. Nothing except a clause. I read it 3 times to be sure I understood. If any of our children attempt to dispute this will or suggest Margaret Quinn is unfit to manage her affairs, they forfeit all claim to any inheritance, material or fiduciary. I felt the words settle into my chest like stones. I looked up at Benji, who was quietly stirring his water with a straw eyes downcast. He hadn't said a word since I started reading. I slid to the next page. There were bank records, a trust certificate, a breakdown of assets. Then something strange, a USB stick taped to a folder marked audio file. I pulled out my laptop from my purse. Gerald gave it to me last year for my birthday. He said it was time I learned how to video call the grandkids on something bigger than my phone screen. I plugged in the drive and clicked on the only file it contained. At first, just static. Then Ethan's voice unmistakable. Calm, clinical. He was talking about guardianship, something about how Mom's memory had gotten worse. He said she seemed confused, fragile, easily manipulated. I could hear Sophie in the background agreeing. Liam chimed in, suggesting they consult with an attorney friend of his in New York. The date on the file was only 6 weeks after Gerald's funeral. I sat very still. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just let the recording play out as my own children discussed in hushed tones how to have me declared legally incompetent. At that moment, a kind of silence formed inside me. Not the quiet of grief, but the silence that comes when something inside you stops believing what it used to. I had spent so long trying to keep this family together, assuming that love, if I just showed enough of it, would be mirrored back. But here was proof real and undeniable that love wasn't what held us anymore. If it ever had. I closed the laptop slowly. My hand hovered over the keyboard for a moment longer, like it wasn't mine. Then I looked at Benji. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. I asked him if he knew. He shook his head. Said he only found the file after he heard them talking about the inheritance, about the way they planned to split everything. He went back to the garage and searched. He didn't know what he was looking for, just that something felt off. I believed him. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sidewalks were covered in white. The world always looks clean right after a snowfall, even if the dirt is just hidden underneath. Inside, the noise of the restaurant began to return. A waiter dropped a glass somewhere near the kitchen. A child burst into laughter. But something had shifted inside me. Something important. Gerald hadn't just written a will. He'd written a shield. He saw what I didn't want to see. Prepared for what I couldn't imagine. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. About giving me the power to walk away with my head held high. I wasn't broken. Not by grief. Not by betrayal. I still had choices. I still had worth. I folded the papers carefully and returned them to the envelope. Then I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over Benji's. For the first time that day, he looked at me, and for the first time I felt like I could see what came next. I didn't open the second folder until the next morning. The night had left me too raw, and even sleep had felt like something borrowed. I sat at the small breakfast table by the window, wrapped in Gerald's old cardigan, while outside the world looked deceptively still beneath the snow. The folder was thick. I braced myself. The first page stopped me cold. It was a DNA test. One of those home kits, but notarized and signed. The names typed across the top made my heart skip Benji Meyer and Margaret Quinn. Relationship tested grandparent to grandchild. The result was printed in bold, no genetic match. I flipped the page, hands trembling. There was another test. This one listed Gerald's name. Same result. No biological relationship. I stared at the print long enough for the letters to blur. The room around me didn't feel real anymore. My kitchen clock ticked off seconds I wasn't ready to live in. The next document was a birth certificate. The original from a county in Oregon I didn't recognize. The mother's name was left blank. Adoptive parent Sophie Meyer. It was dated 16 years ago, 2 months before she brought Benji home, wrapped in that yellow blanket with giraffes on it. We had asked questions then. Of course we had. Sophie was vague, said the father didn't want to be involved, that she'd handled things privately. Gerald had pressed, but I fooled that I was defended her. She was heartbroken after the divorce. She needed a fresh start. I said we should just be grateful for the blessing of a baby, no matter how he came to us. I flipped through more pages. Letters, applications, receipts, a financial ledger Gerald must have compiled himself. He'd tracked everything. Tuition payments, medical bills, trust contributions. Some were marked with small red dots. Gerald's way of signaling inconsistencies, mismatched account numbers, duplicate requests, false signatures. The total was circled at the bottom in Gerald's neat handwriting. $645,000. That's how much Sophie had siphoned from us using Benji as a bridge. Some of it under the guise of educational needs. Some for health emergencies that never happened. One time for a custody battle that apparently never existed. I sat very still. My hands gripped the arms of my chair as if I were bracing for impact. In a way, I was. Benji was still asleep on the couch, curled beneath the quilt I'd made for Gerald when he started chemo. His mouth hung slightly open, one arm stretched above his head, like he was reaching for something in a dream. He looked so young in that moment, so completely unaware. The tears came slow and quiet. Not the sobbing kind. The kind that slipped down your cheek without permission. They weren't for the money. Gerald and I had lived simply invested wisely. We never needed lavish things. It wasn't about that. It was about being deceived. Lied to. Used. It was about the nights I stayed on the phone with Sophie soothing her when she said Benji was having trouble sleeping. The gifts we sent. The times Gerald flew across the country to help her move apartments, believing she was overwhelmed and alone. All of it based on a story she manufactured and fed us like medicine. I thought about confronting her. Calling, screaming, demanding answers. But what would it change? The lie was already built into the bones of our memories. There was no tearing it down without tearing apart everything we'd made of Benji's place in our family. And Benji, that was the cruelest part. Because whatever Sophie had done, he wasn't part of it. Not really. He had grown up in the love we gave him. He didn't forge documents. He didn't count checks. He counted on bedtime stories and summer visits and Christmas cards tucked with $20 bills. He counted on us being there. I didn't know what to do with that. How do you hold a child accountable for a lie they didn't tell, but benefited from every single day? How do you reconcile love with betrayal when they live under the same roof? At 8:20 a.m., Benji stirred. I wiped my face quickly and folded the documents into a fresh envelope. He walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up like a baby bird. He smiled when he saw me. That open, hopeful kind of smile only a child can give after doing something brave and not yet realizing the cost. I asked if he wanted some eggs. He nodded, sat down quietly. I made breakfast with hands that felt strangely detached from my body. We didn't talk about the folder. Not yet. I wasn't ready, and maybe he wasn't either. But something had shifted in how I looked at him. Not colder, not kinder, just different. The way you look at someone not as who they are, but who they've always been in the shadow of a secret. As we ate, I watched him chew slowly, like he was stalling. Then he looked up and said he was sorry. For all of it. For the dinner. For the secrets. For not knowing how to fix it. I told him he didn't have to fix it. That was never his job. He asked if I was angry. I said yes, but not at him. And somehow that truth made room for something else. Something closer to love. Tucked between the will and the financial documents was a smaller envelope, cream-colored, sealed with wax. My name was written on the front in Gerald's handwriting, steady and strong. I held it for a moment, before opening it, as if touching the paper might bring him back just long enough to feel real. Inside was a single sheet, folded once the edges slightly worn. His writing filled the page, neat and careful. I took a deep breath, sat down at the kitchen table, and read, "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then you already know more than I ever wanted you to face alone. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you myself, but time caught up faster than I thought it would. So, I did the next best thing. I wrote you this, hoping it would feel like me beside you when you needed it most. I've loved you for 43 years. I loved you the first time I saw you carrying that armload of books at the Asheville Library, and I loved you every morning since. You have been the best part of my life. I've always admired your kindness, your willingness to believe the best in people. But kindness is a light that attracts shadows, Maggie. And sometimes those closest to us forget what it means to earn your trust. I saw it happening. The way our kids changed, the way they talked around you instead of to you. I wanted to believe it was stress, bad timing, a phase. But it wasn't. It was something colder. I couldn't protect you in life the way I wanted to. So I did my best to protect you in what came after. The cabin is yours now. Everything is. I know you didn't ask for it, but you deserve to start fresh. To have a place that's still yours and mine, untouched by what they tried to take. I always dreamed we'd grow old there. You planting tomatoes. Me pretending I knew how to fish. Maybe that dream looks different now, but it can still be beautiful. I believe that. You are not broken. You are not used up. You are still the woman who made a home out of laughter and bad wallpaper and casseroles that fed more than just bellies. You still have purpose, Maggie. You still have love to give. Maybe not to them. Maybe to someone new. Maybe even to yourself. Don't let bitterness take root. Anger is heavy. Carry only what keeps you warm. I'll be waiting. Not too far. Just on the edge of the lake where the light touches the water like it remembers us. Always yours, Gerald. When I finished reading, I sat quietly, the letter trembling in my hands. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I folded it carefully and held it against my chest. His voice echoed in the stillness of the room. Not just the words on the page, the way he used to say my name when he was proud, when he was worried, when he was in love. He saw me, even when I didn't see myself. That morning, I packed a bag, and I started driving toward Blue Ridge. The drive to Blue Ridge took 5 hours. The roads curved through hills that looked like soft waves under a gray winter sky. I kept the windows rolled up but cracked open just enough to let in the scent of pine. Benji sat beside me with a duffel bag and his sketch pad flipping through pages with quiet focus. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. The cabin sat just where I remembered it. Nestled between tall trees, its front porch framed by a swing Gerald built one summer, when we thought time was endless. The key still fit. The door creaked in a way that sounded familiar, like an old friend clearing their throat. We spent the first few days cleaning, dusting shelves, opening windows, folding linens that smelled faintly of cedar. I found Gerald's fishing hat tucked behind a chair cushion and set it on a hook by the door. Not to forget him, just to keep him close. Benji asked if he could stay a while. I told him he didn't have to ask. That night, we lit a fire and made grilled cheese. The logs crackled as the snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering everything in quiet. By the end of the week, I had planted 2 small rows of lettuce in the garden bed out back. The soil was still cold, but something in me needed to feel my hands in the dirt. In the mornings, I walked the trail behind the cabin while Benji sketched trees and tried to learn the names of birds. I signed up for an art class at the community center. Oil painting. Thursdays at 10. That's where I met Mrs. Lyle. She wore bright scarves and spoke slowly, like each word carried a memory. She had lost her husband 2 years before and kept his old paintbrushes in a tin marked sugar. We started sitting together after class, sharing tea from travel mugs and stories we hadn't told anyone in years. I baked my first apple pie in April. The crust was uneven. The apples a little tart. But when Benji took a second slice, I felt something shift in my chest. Not joy exactly, but the beginning of something near it. Spring came slowly. One day, I noticed green pushing up through the snowmelt. The sound of birds returned. I found myself humming as I swept the porch. Mrs. Lyle brought over wildflowers in a jam jar and showed me how to use pastels. Life didn't go back to how it was. It didn't need to. It became something different, softer, smaller, but full. I still thought about the past, the hurt, the distance that had grown without me noticing. But those thoughts came less often, and when they did, they didn't sting as sharply. I learned to let them pass like weather. Acknowledged, but not held on to. One morning, around 8:30 a.m., Benji handed me a drawing. It was the cabin wrapped in snow, with smoke curling from the chimney, and a cardinal perched on the windowsill. I framed it and hung it above the fireplace. The house felt like home again. It was just past 1 in the afternoon when I heard the tires on gravel. The crunching sound carried through the open window above the sink. I looked up from the bread I was kneading and saw Sophie's car parked at the edge of the trees. She got out slowly, like someone unsure if the ground would hold. Benji was at the community center, and the cabin felt quiet, too quiet for something like this. I opened the door before she knocked. Her eyes were tired. She looked thinner. Her coat hung loose at the shoulders. She didn't ask how I was. She got right to the point. Said she thought it might be time to talk about the estate, about what was fair. She said the will wasn't a reflection of the whole family, that maybe we could find a way to move forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just asked her why she never told me Benji was adopted. Her face changed. She sat down on the porch step, like the air had been knocked out of her. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she said she found out when she was 24. The doctor told her she wouldn't be able to carry a pregnancy. Something about her uterus. She didn't remember all the medical terms anymore. Just the silence in the exam room afterward. She said she tried to accept it, that she focused on her career, tried to believe life had other plans. But when her fiancé left, when everything else started to crumble, she couldn't bear the idea of being empty in every way. She found Benji through a private agency. The mother was young, scared, and didn't want contact. It felt like fate. She said she told herself it didn't matter. That family was about love, not blood. And at first, that's all it was. But when she saw how we looked at Benji, how we doted on him, how we poured ourselves into him, it started to scare her. She thought if we knew the truth, we'd pull away, take him back, love him less. So she built the lie, layer by layer, until even she believed it. She said it got harder to come clean with every gift, every favor, every dollar. Shame doesn't stop you, she said. It just teaches you to hide better. I sat down beside her. The wind rustled through the trees. A hawk passed overhead. She didn't look at me. Her hands were clenched in her lap. I told her I wished she had trusted me, that it wasn't the adoption that hurt. It was the silence, the secrets, the choice to see us as people who needed managing instead of people who could love without condition. She said she was sorry, not with a speech, just a whisper. I didn't say it was okay. It wasn't. But I told her I heard her. That mattered more than I expected. We sat in silence for a while, not fixed, but no longer broken in quite the same way. When she left, she didn't ask for anything else, and I didn't watch her drive away. Benji was playing the piano by the front window. The same melody he'd practiced all week. Something soft, almost like a lullaby, but with enough strength beneath it to keep the room feeling awake. The sun filtered through the pine trees and landed across the floor in strips of gold. I sat with a cup of tea that had gone cold, just listening. This life isn't the one I planned. It isn't the one Gerald and I dreamed about during our Sunday walks, hand in hand, mapping out retirement like it was a puzzle we'd solve together. But it's the one I have, and somehow it fits now. The pain didn't disappear. I still think about the way things used to feel, the way holidays once sounded. But I don't live there anymore. I stopped carrying the weight of what might have been. I've learned that you can love people deeply and still need distance. You can forgive parts of them and still protect your peace. I used to think family meant blood, that you were bound to people because of history and names and shared birthdays. But what I've found sitting here in the quiet with music in the background and laughter down the hall is that real family shows up. They stay. They tell the truth even when it's hard. They love you without asking you to disappear. Benji isn't mine by birth, but he is mine in all the ways that matter. He makes the garden beds in spring. He carries in the firewood before snow. He remembers to ask if my ankle's bothering me. And every morning, he makes the coffee just the way Gerald used to. I don't know what the future holds for my children. I don't know if we'll ever sit at the same table again, but I don't feel bitter anymore. I left that behind with the last of the summer leaves. The door isn't locked. It's just not wide open. If they come, they'll come into truth. On my terms. What I know now is this. Peace doesn't come from fixing everything. It comes from knowing what you'll no longer let break you. And in this little cabin with a boy who chose to love me, I found it.